College football is back, and week one did not disappoint. We had instant classics, shocking upsets, breakout stars, and a few contenders who already look like pretenders. If this weekend taught us anything, it's that the playoff race doesn't wait until November, it starts right now. Thursday night set the tone. South Florida blowing out Boise State, Rutgers barely escaping Ohio, East Carolina's Caton Hauser throwing for 360 yards in a narrow loss to NC State, alongside Nebraska's sophomore quarterback Dylan Raiola kept on building momentum, guiding the Huskers to a hard-fought win at Cincinnati. Friday night brought pure chaos. Tarleton State stunning Army in double overtime, Georgia Tech spoiling Colorado's opener in Boulder, and Auburn led by Oklahoma transfer Jackson Arnold in a rushing attack that piled up over 300 yards, physically dominating Baylor. Then Saturday hit, and it was one of the most loaded slates we've seen in years. Number 1 Texas versus number 3 Ohio did not disappoint. LSU took down Clemson in Death Valley East. Florida State transfer quarterback Thomas Castellanos backed up his bold words from June with an upset of Alabama. Kansas State barely surviving against North Dakota. Oklahoma transfer John Mateer nearly throwing for 400 yards in his debut. And Utah flat out dismantling UCLA in the Rose Bowl. And the weekend didn't stop there. Sunday gave us Miami edging Notre Dame in a top 10 thriller, and Monday capped it off with TCU blowing the doors off North Carolina and Bill Belichick. Buckle up, because if week one is any indication, this season might be one of the wildest we've ever seen. And that leaves us with one question. Was this one of the best opening weekends in college football history? And today, we're breaking it all down. If there was one theme that jumped out to me in week one, it was the play of transfer quarterbacks. Everywhere you looked, new faces were taking over programs, some thriving right away, and others kind of stumbling out of the gate. The biggest splash came from Florida State's Thomas Castellanos. Just months removed leaving Boston College, he walked into his debut talking big about Alabama not having Nick Saban to save them anymore. And then he delivered. Castellanos didn't need to throw it 40 times. He picked his spots, hitting for 152 yards through the air and adding 78 more plus a touchdown on the ground. More than the numbers, it was the confidence and energy he brought that powered FSU to the upset of the weekend, a 31-17 shocker over number 8 Alabama as a near 2-touchdown underdog. And then, down in Miami, yet another SEC transplant made his mark. Former Georgia starter Carson Beck didn't light up the box score, but he did exactly what the Hurricanes needed in a top 10 clash with Notre Dame. After a shaky start, Beck found his rhythm, rattling off 12 straight completions and then finishing with 205 yards and 2 scores. Miami walked away with this top 10 matchup with a 27-24 win, and Beck reminded everyone why scouts once viewed him as NFL caliber. Meanwhile, down in Waco, Auburn unveiled its new leader in Jackson Arnold, the Oklahoma transfer, and Arnold didn't beat Baylor with his arm, he beat them with his legs. Auburn leaned on a punishing ground game, and Arnold led the way with 137 rushing yards and 2 rushing scores, including the back-breaking 27-yard scramble in the fourth quarter. For a program searching for an identity, that performance sent a clear message. Of course, not every transfer story was a fairy tale. Nico Amaviala was the number 1 transfer in the country, and he looked completely out of sync in his UCLA debut. Facing Utah's relentless defense, he finished with just 136 yards, a touchdown, and a pick in a 43-10 loss. So, whether it was Castellanos stunning Alabama, Beck steadying Miami, Arnold grinding down Baylor, or Mateer rewriting the Oklahoma record book, transfer quarterbacks were the center of week one. Some schools found instant answers, while others are already wondering if they made the right move. And of course, it wasn't just individual players making headlines in week one. Entire programs put themselves in the spotlight for better and for worse. Let's start with the winners and losers of this week. Florida State was the story of the weekend. Thomas Castellanos' debut could not have gone better, but it wasn't just about him. It was about Mike Norvell's offseason moves. He brought in Gus Malzahn as an offensive coordinator, and Malzahn's history against Alabama is no secret. He's beaten Nick Saban before and drew up a game plan that leaned into Castellanos' dual threat skill perfectly. Add in Tony White on defense, and suddenly FSU looks like a program that went from the bottom of the ACC to back in the national conversation in just one offseason. That 31-17 upset of Alabama was symbolic. The Seminoles aren't just trying to climb back, they might already be there. Ohio State also made a statement. In a number 1 versus number 3 showdown with Texas, the Buckeyes' offense was not very impressive, but holding Arch Manning and the Longhorns to just 7 points in one of the most hyped openers ever shows exactly why OSU is still the team to beat in the Big Ten and maybe even the nation. LSU grabbed a massive win over Clemson, and they were powered by a defense that finally looked like an LSU defense again. This was the kind of win that flips momentum back in the LSU's favor in the SEC race. And make sure you're not overlooking Tulane either. If they can split their games with teams like Duke and Ole Miss while handling AAC play, they could be the clear frontrunner for the G5 playoff bid. And don't forget about Tennessee, because they deserve some love too. Joey Aguilar, who transferred in late, looked like he'd been running in Heupel's offense for years. The Vols look like they have a real chance to stir things up in the SEC. As for the losers category, the headliners are Alabama and Kalen DeBoer. The Tide dropped their first season opener since 2001, and it wasn't just the loss that hurt, it was who they lost to. An unranked Florida State team that finished near the bottom of the Power 4 last year. Offensively, Alabama looked stuck in neutral, averaging just 4.6 yards per play, and while the defense gave up over 10 yards per passing play, it was very disappointing for Alabama. For a fan base that grew up on Saban's dominance, this felt like a free fall, especially considering how badly FSU dominated the trenches. To add salt to the wound, a lot of Alabama fans already are calling for DeBoer's job. It's harsh, but that's the reality when you follow a legend. You lose early, you lose ugly, and the heat gets turned up immediately. Texas and Arch Manning also land firmly in the losers column. The Longhorns came into the season as the SEC favorite and the number 1 overall team, and Manning himself was the betting favorite for the Heisman. But on the biggest stage of Week 1 against defending champ Ohio State, both fell flat. Texas managed just 7 points, and Manning finished the game with 170 yards and a single touchdown, alongside an interception. Most of his yardage and stats were coming in garbage time after the game was kind of already out of reach. For a player billed as the next superstar, it was about as deflating as an opener as you could script. Now, Texas had to fight its way through Georgia, Florida, A&M, and Oklahoma with all the pressure cranked even higher, and Manning is already facing this kind of scrutiny that can derail a season before it really gets going. Kansas State also lands here after they barely squeaked past FCS North Dakota. This is not the way you reassert yourself as a Big 12 contender. Now, for the game of the week, I have number 6 Notre Dame at number 10 Miami, and Miami Gardens felt different on Sunday night. Miami hadn't beaten a top 10 team in nearly 8 years. The last one was Notre Dame, and they did it again, 27-24 in a game that felt like a switch flipping for Mario Cristobal's program. Carson Beck's debut wasn't about fireworks so much as control. 20 of 31 for 205 and 2 scores, but most importantly, he owned the 2 sequences that defined the night. Miami's 75-yard touchdown drive to close the half, and then the other 75-yard drive to open the third. For almost an hour of real time, Notre Dame barely touched the ball, and that possession squeeze put the Irish on their heels. However, the moment that tilted the stadium was CJ Daniels' insane one-handed touchdown with 12 seconds before halftime. It was a pure theft of momentum. From there on, the Canes leaned in who they wanted to be. Malachi Toney as the chain mover, Mark Fletcher pounding between the tackles, and then Beck taking the gimmies and staying ahead of the sticks. When Notre Dame punched back late, it wasn't too much for Miami. CJ Carr was poised for a first start. He went 19 of 30 with 2 touchdowns, and he had a 65-yard strike to Eli Raridon and the 7-yard keeper to tie it with 3:21. It turned into a fourth quarter test of who could finish the game. Miami's defensive line answered that question. Ruben Bain's tip drill interception set up points, and on the final series, Akeem Messidor and Bain slammed the door with consecutive sacks. This front is very, very talented, and they're good enough to carry this defense in a pinch, and it showed up exactly when it had to. Then the kicker Carter Davis, the FAU transfer, drilled a 47-yarder with 1 minute and 4 seconds left like it was a PAT. Ball game, statement, exhale for Miami fans. As for Notre Dame, I don't think this was a very bad showing. There's plenty to build on with Carr's composure and the explosives they found when they finally wrestled the ball back, but it's definitely something to work on. I honestly thought the Irish was going to control this game from start to finish, and instead, the story was Miami winning the time of game, stealing the end of half, owning the third quarter, and letting the defensive line close the game. If Miami can keep this identity, efficient, back, physical run game, a front that hurts, they won't win just one top 10 game. They could find a blueprint for real success. So what did all of these games have in common, it seemed? Defense carried the day. LSU, Ohio State, Florida State. They all leaned on their fronts to win, and even Tennessee's offense was built on balance and toughness. For week 1, when mistakes are common and chemistry is building, the teams that won were the ones who imposed their will in the trenches. Along with that, the new AP Top 25 is out, and after a wild week 1, we've already got some massive shakeups. Let's start at the very top. Ohio State takes over the number 1 spot after beating preseason number 1 Texas 14-7 in Columbus. The Buckeyes didn't exactly light it up offensively, but with freshman Julian Sayin making his first career start and that defense shutting down Arch Manning for 3 quarters, they earned it. Ohio State now controls its path early, a huge boost for Ryan Day's squad. Penn State holds steady at number 2, but the real risers were LSU and Miami. LSU jumped from number 9 to number 3 after their defensive slugfest win over Clemson, proving Brian Kelly's team is absolutely in national title conversation. In Miami, the Hurricanes are suddenly number 5 after knocking off Notre Dame in a thriller. Carson Beck didn't have to be perfect, but he was poised, and Miami's defensive line looked very dominant. Cristobal's team is back in the spotlight. On the flip side, the biggest drop belongs to Alabama. The Tide plummeted 13 spots from number 8 all the way down to 21 after losing to Florida State. Kalen DeBoer is already hearing calls for his job after one game. And the scary part is they didn't really do anything well on Saturday. Meanwhile, Florida State vaults into the rankings at number 14 after being unranked, as Thomas Castellanos backed up every bit of his trash talk and FSU looked legit. Texas falls from number 1 to number 7, so not a free fall, but not a very good feeling for a team that came in with sky-high expectations. Clemson dropped from number 4 to number 8 after the LSU loss. Notre Dame slid 3 spots to number 9 after the Miami game, and honestly that might be a little harsh given how competitive they looked with a freshman quarterback. Other quick movers were Oregon as they edged up to number 6, Georgia sat steady at number 4, Penn State, like I said, stayed at number 2, South Carolina cracked the top 10 after beating Virginia Tech, and Utah snuck in at number 25 after demolishing UCLA, while Boise State got bounced completely after being embarrassed by USF. So to me the headline is simple. Ohio State is back on top, Alabama is in absolute freefall, and Miami and LSU might just be the biggest early winners in the playoff race. Now, before I wrap up the video, I want to take a quick look at Week 2. Make sure you circle Michigan at Oklahoma on your calendars in primetime. It's a ranked showdown that could shape the playoff picture before September even cools off. The Cy-Hawk game between Iowa and Iowa State always delivers drama, and this year it's got real Big 12 implications. And don't sleep on South Florida heading into the swamp after knocking off Boise. The Bulls have a chance to shake up the SEC's reputation. It's only Week 2, but the stakes already feel huge. Make sure to drop a comment with who your biggest riser or faller is and which Week 2 matchup you're most excited for. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss my full breakdown next week. If Week 1 was any preview, this season is going to be wild.